My name's Ben. If you're new here, if you're not new here, my name is still Ben. Today we're going to be talking about the final position of the major scale shape, touch a little bit on its position in CAGED, and go over a new 3-note per string shape as well. So we got a lot to cover here, and I don't want this video to take forever. So let's get started right into it. The 5th shape of the major scale. We are in G, and I do think I can grab this without changing. So the final shape, position 5, is in a little bit of an awkward spot just because of where the root note lies within it, but once we learn the 3-note per string shape, it all comes together. So let's get cracking into this. The root note that we're going to use is the octave of our G note here on the 3rd fret of the low E string. Just keeping in mind that this octave, you can also play it back here, but there is one note that creeps, it's that one right there, that creeps right behind 12th fret. So as a result, if you were playing down here, you would just have to keep that one in mind. I digress. Our root note starting on the 15th fret of the low E string, that is G. Then we're going to go up to the A string, that'll be the 12th fret. Moving forward, then the 15th fret. Respectively, I used my index, my middle, and my ring finger there. Right, so the 15th fret of the A string, then it's going to be the 12th fret of the D string, 14th fret of the D string. Once we hit the G string, this is where we have to come back to the 11th fret. That's that note. 12th fret of the G string. And then we go to the 14th fret. For that section, index, middle, pinky. Moving up to the B string, the 12th fret with your index finger. We're going to go 13th fret with our middle finger. 15th fret with the pinky. Finally, the high E string, 12th fret of the high E with your index. And then we've got the 14th fret. Once again, I'm using my middle finger for this. And finally, the 15th fret. Excuse me. So, starting from our root note, we have our 1 there. Moving forward, that's our 2nd degree, our 3rd, the 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, back to the root, the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and the root again. G major, position 5. Let's talk about that. Very first thing to take away from this is, since we started in G and we've got our G chord, this particular shape pattern is the G shape from our CAGED system. Since we're on position 5, this means that we have literally crossed over every single CAGED chord shape. We started with the E shape in position 1, moved into the D shape, position 2, then the C shape, position 3, A shape, position 4, and finally the G shape at position 5 on here. It's the same thing here, I just am running out of fingers and there's a huge acoustic dreadnought body in the way. So, our arpeggio shape for that is just outlining what a G major regular open chord would look like. And I like to throw in the rock and roll G here, where you drop your ring finger on the 3rd fret of the B string. I really like to do that. That's adding another 5th in the mix, which makes it sound really nice when you go through your arpeggio. The 5th, and then the root. Let's touch on this 3-note per string method as well. I think for me personally, I don't really think too much in regards to these scale patterns much anymore. I definitely view the fretboard more in terms of the 3-note patterns. And from there, once I'm cruising from root to root note, so to speak, coming down in arpeggios, which links up the next one, and finding all of those arpeggios is kind of how I think about it these days. Let's talk about this 3-note per string shape. We'll talk about this one. I'll show you how I just did that to connect the two, and we'll see where we go from there. This 3-note per string shape combines position 4 that we learned last time and position 5. And once again, I prefer these anyway because you cross 3 octaves using one scale shape, and it primes you perfectly to get into the next 3 note per string shape. So I would start this one on the G note on the A string, so that's the 10th fret of the A string. Anytime I have a gap where it's a whole step and a whole step, I like to use my middle finger for the first whole step and then the pinky for the next whole step. I feel that it's more comfortable than trying to do it with the ring finger. That's a little awkward and a bit of a stretch there at the joint. So that's how I do it. Plus, it also lines me up so whenever I have that half step to a whole step, I'm already using the same finger, so it doesn't confuse me. So, 10th fret A string to the 12th fret A string, once again using the middle finger. 14th fret with the pinky, it's getting our 3rd there. The same shape on the D string there, so 10th fret, 12th fret, 14th fret with the index, middle, and pinky, respectively. G string, we're sliding that shape up just a half step right there, so now it's the 11th fret, 12th fret, 14th fret. Then we're taking this shape and moving the entirety of it a half step and up a string. So on the B, it's going to be the 12th fret, the 13th fret, and the 15th fret. And then we have a little flip-flop here of the ring and the middle on our final string. So E is going to be 12th fret, 14th fret, 15th, right? Now, one thing to touch on when you are going this direction through the 3 note per string scale, keep track of how you used your fingers there, because when you come down backwards, a big stumble that I see happen in players is they'll use a different finger for a note. Maybe when they came down, I feel like I've seen somebody use a ring finger there. And when somebody uses a ring finger there and you try to get, unless you're really aware of what you're doing, that's going to make you stumble. So I always encourage people, whatever you did going this direction, make sure you do the exact opposite with the same fingers going this way. It'll make it so you don't stumble. Taking a look at the first 3 note per string shape that we learned, I suppose, that would have been position 1 and position 2. So taking that one, first fret, or I should say first, the root, moving into, once we get to our next octave, we'll see that we're going to be lined up perfectly for one of our caged arpeggios, which leads then into this 3 note per string shape. This is just one way to think about it to get you moving more horizontally instead of vertically. Once again, we don't ever want to do this. The reason we don't want to do that is you're typically not going to be playing over one chord. Typically, a song is going to have multiple chords going on through the changes. And if you are stuck going this direction, it's going to be difficult for you, unless you already know how to do it, to find those chord tones for the chord changes. It is possible, but until you really know how to find those, it's just not going to sound that great. So it's better to start moving horizontal. I promise it'll make it sound better, and you'll find those chord tones a lot easier. So position 1 and 2, that 3 note per string shape, 3rd fret, 5th fret, 7th fret of the low E string, once again using index, middle, and pinky for that big stretch. Same shape on the A string, 3, 5, 7, right? Next string, that's going to be the 4th fret, 5th fret, 7th fret on the D string, G string, same shape, 4, 5, 7, and our B string. It's going to be 5, 7, and 8. So as we move through, this is another thing I really like to touch on. Make sure you're keeping track of what your scale degrees are. This is my root, my 2nd, my 3rd, my 4th, my 5th, the 6th, the 7, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1. Because let's say I want to have a major 7 going on. Well, I need the 1, the 3, the 5, the 7, and maybe a 1 again. 1, the 3, the 5, and the 7, and the 1 again. major 7. In order to do that, you need to know what your notes are. Or not even your notes, we're guitar players. We love shapes, we love patterns. That's what it's really all about. So if you apply a number, then it works in all keys, doesn't matter. You've got the pattern down, right? Main takeaway from this, there's a 1, there's a 1, and there is a 1. That is the 3rd fret of the low E string, that's my root. I have the 5th fret of the D string, also my root, and the 8th fret of my high B string, also my root. This note right here is typically where this one ends. You could start climbing your way up through the E string, but I like to stop here because it's my root. It also puts me right dead smack center in my D shape of my CAGED system. That's that root note that's coming from the D shape. And since that's coming from my D shape, the D shape is just the top portion of the C shape. So I know that if I come through and land here, I can work my way down the C-shaped arpeggio there, my C chord from CAGED. I have now landed on another G root note because I know that my C shape, that's a C, that's a G. Once I know that, oh, there's the root note on the A string, that's the perfect, there's my 3-note per string shape. So just a way to find out where you're at on the fretboard. While you're playing a lead, am I working with this side? Do I want to work more in this timbre? Do I want to maybe work my way down? Regardless, it's just a way of keeping track of where you're at and making those connections, those little bridges from familiar shape. Guitar players tend to get lost whenever they hit what I like to call no man's land. And that's those little gaps in between familiar shapes that we know. Any means necessary to fill in the gaps, so to speak, is a wonderful, viable option to keep tabs on where you're at. One of my all-time favorite tips and tricks for people that are just kind of starting out with scales and getting into working on their fretboard fluency is telling them to run through, scale. In this case, we're using the major scale, and run that major scale from octave to octave. There's only 6 G notes on this side of the fretboard. And the reason for that, there's only 6 strings. Each string has 12 notes on it, the 12 chromatic notes. So just like what's the saying, a clock is right twice a day? Well, a string is got one root note twice on it, this octave and octave. When you think about it that way, it starts to feel a little less daunting. But I think taking those little bite-sized pieces, running from one root note to the next, there's a root note. Maybe I want to go from this root note over here to this root note. I probably have, there's that root note. Now I want to get to this root note up top here. Grab that one, maybe that root note. I want to, from that root note, I want that root note. And you can see how just kind of down, instead of destroying yourself with, oh my gosh, there's 5 whole shapes, that's like 300 notes. It's not 300 notes, but certainly feels like 300 notes when you're learning it. Instead, there's only a 7-note difference between this note and this note. So I just need to find those 7 notes. There's only a 7-note difference between this note and note. And how do I find those? Work my way up on the low string, or do I somehow bridge through that one? Or finding those little bits and pieces of small distance leaps. Instead of trying to tackle the whole instrument at once, tackle small chunks of it. And I think that eventually you'll find that this is not really a whole lot. It could always be worse, Practices and stuff, definitely moving octave to octave is always a great option. Of course, note groupings is always great. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 3, and so on and so forth. Your time with it. I do think once you mess with the 3-note per string patterns, they just make more sense. That's kind of another thing too that I really like about 3-note per strings. I'm just going to touch on it. They really nicely open up for those big major arpeggios. If you guys have any questions or comments, please leave it down below. Definitely check out our newsletter link. I'll leave that in the comments below as well. We send out tips and tricks once a week for you guys, stuff a lot like this. I'm Ben with Intermediate Guitar. It's been a pleasure as always. Toodles, y'all.